On August 16, 2023, a young woman was rushed into one of the most renowned medical centers in the world, the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota. She arrived in grave condition. Her organs were failing, her body was racked with dehydration, and her temperature swung unpredictably. Within hours, the staff at the clinic, some of the best in modern medicine, were fighting a battle they couldn't explain. That woman was Betty Bowman, a respected pharmacist, known for her intelligence, compassion, and dedication to health. Colleagues were stunned. She had been full of energy the day before. Now she was dying, and no one knew why. Betty Jo Bowman was born in 1991 in Kansas, raised in a close, hard-working family that valued honesty and perseverance. She excelled in school, especially chemistry and biology, always asking not just how, but why medicines worked. She earned top grades, won scholarships, and by college already knew she wanted to help people through medicine. When she entered a university pharmacy program, she shone immediately. Curious, careful, methodical. Professors remembered her as the student who stayed after class to ask about the molecular pathways of a drug, not just its dosage. Her passion carried her into a pharmacy program, and later, into a promising career that earned her respect and admiration wherever she worked. Among the students she met, there was a young man named Connor Bowman. He was smart, confident, sometimes too confident. 2 years younger than Betty, he had a flair for conversation and a talent for shaping people's impressions. Where Betty was straightforward, he was smooth. He could charm professors, talk his way out of mistakes, and make friends easily, though friends sometimes noticed a calculating edge behind the smile. Still, opposites attract. Their relationship began in study sessions, blossomed into romance, and by the time both graduated, they were seen as an ambitious pair destined for big medical careers. When Betty accepted a position at the prestigious Mayo Clinic, it felt like a dream realized, a chance to work at one of the world's top medical centers. Connor, still in school completing his medical training, followed her to Minnesota. They married in May 2021 in a small ceremony surrounded by family, promises, and hope for a bright future. But reality inside their new life was more complicated. Betty's career thrived immediately. She earned respect and promotions. Connor's path was slower. Enrolled in residency programs, he was buried in coursework and unpaid rotations. The bills piled up, and because he wasn't yet earning a salary, Betty's paycheck covered everything: rent, tuition, living expenses. Friends later said that Connor seemed unsettled by the imbalance. He had always liked appearing successful, but now the success was hers, not his. He depended on her income and her discipline, and dependence turned into quiet resentment. To outside observers, the Bowmans looked perfect, two medical professionals with shared ambition. The reality inside the house in Rochester was a widening gap of frustration, jealousy, and mistrust. They tried to modernize the marriage by setting boundaries and experimenting with new rules, even an open arrangement, promising that emotional attachment to others was off limits. But boundaries in relationships are fragile things. At some point, Betty discovered that Connor had crossed one. What began as minor suspicion grew into undeniable truth. He was not just unfaithful, he was emotionally involved. For Betty, that became the breaking point. She wanted a divorce. It was not a decision born of anger, people later said, but of quiet realism. She was ready to move on. But for Connor, divorce meant financial collapse and the end of the comfortable life he had come to enjoy. He faced debts from medical school, limited income, and the humiliation of losing a wife whose career outshined his. Somewhere inside that brewing storm of resentment, the seed of a plan appears to have taken root. On the evening of August 10th, 2023, Betty invited a close friend over for a casual night at home. A meal, some conversation, a chance to unwind. Connor was present but distant. Then, unexpectedly, he offered to make smoothies. It was a small gesture that startled them both because Connor rarely cooked, rarely joined domestic tasks. In the kitchen, he blended fruit, yogurt, and something else. When he returned with 2 glasses, the drink smelled fine, but tasted strange, bitter, slightly salty. The women joked about his culinary skills, laughed, and threw the smoothies away. Later, that minor oddity would feel hauntingly different. 6 days after that night, Betty came home exhausted from work. It was the end of a long shift running laboratory discussions. She wanted rest. Connor greeted her again with a smoothie. This time, he had perfected his recipe. It tasted normal, masking anything unusual. She drank it without hesitation. The following morning, she felt weak, headache, stomach trouble. By midday, she was vomiting, unable to hold water. Her skin grew clammy. Her muscles ached. She assumed maybe food poisoning or a virus. She had been under stress. But the next day, the weakness turned to collapse. By the time she reached the Mayo Clinic emergency department on August 16th, her body was already in catastrophic failure. Doctors were bewildered. Her intestines were dying from lack of oxygen, necrosis spreading through tissue normally resilient. Her kidneys failed, then her liver. She was placed on dialysis, life support machines humming beside her bed. But her numbers kept dropping. Through it all, Connor maintained an eerie composure. He told doctors she had a rare genetic immune disorder known as HLH, a diagnosis that didn't fit at all with her history. He repeated the claim to friends, almost as if rehearsed in advance. Physicians double-checked. There was no evidence she ever had HLH. 4 days after admission, on August 20th at 2:50 p.m., doctors pronounced Betty Bowman dead. The entire episode, from first illness to death, had lasted less than a week. The cause, unknown. In grief, most spouses demand answers. Connor demanded silence. He refused an autopsy, said Betty didn't want her body examined, and immediately filed for cremation. Within hours, he drafted an obituary that mentioned himself and their dog, but not Betty's mother or sister. It was as if he were trying to erase her story before anyone could ask questions. But the staff at Mayo refused to accept that. To them, the case was medically inconsistent with any natural disease. They requested a full autopsy before the body could be cremated. Authorities agreed, halting the process. That decision would become the turning point. When toxicology tests returned, scientists discovered colchicine in Betty's blood, an anti-inflammatory drug used to treat gout, deadly if taken in excess. The amount in her system was catastrophic, dozens of times above therapeutic level. The symptoms matched perfectly: nausea, diarrhea, organ failure, and ultimately multi-system collapse. Death by colchicine poisoning. Investigators immediately turned to access. Who could have obtained such a compound? It was not a household substance. It required either prescription authority or laboratory sourcing. And one person in her life had both. The husband now claiming she died naturally. Detectives obtained warrants for Connor Bowman's devices. What they found painted a grim picture. Search histories reading colchicine lethal dose. How to hide digital purchases. Can police trace Amazon orders? Purchase records for small quantities of colchicine. Notes about sodium nitrate, another chemical that can cause oxygen starvation in blood cells. Bowman, it appeared, had used his medical training to design a poison almost undetectable, except by high-level toxicology. Financial records revealed motive. He was buried under student debt and had a $500,000 life insurance policy on Betty. Messages to acquaintances mentioned financial struggles. One person remembered him joking that he could solve his problems if only he had a lucky windfall. To investigators, the pieces connected with chilling precision. In October 2023, 2 months after Betty's death, police moved in quietly on the Bowman home. At dawn, without resistance, they arrested Connor Bowman and charged him with second-degree murder. What stunned officers was his calm. No denial, no shock, just a steady gaze as if resignation had already set in. He was booked into the Olmsted County Jail. Bail, $2 million. He could not pay it. The Mayo Clinic immediately dismissed him from his residency program and issued a statement expressing sorrow for Betty Bowman's death and full cooperation with the investigation. Her family, devastated but resolute, began the long wait for justice. In the months that followed, detectives compiled layers of evidence, interviews with friends describing the bitter-tasting smoothie, digital forensic reports, credit card purchases, correspondence about life insurance benefits. By winter, the outline of the state's case was clear. Financial motive, opportunity, expertise, chemical evidence, and behavior after death pointing to consciousness of guilt. Yet in America's justice system, accusation is not conviction. Connor Bowman, through his attorney, maintained his innocence. He pleaded not guilty, insisting that the state's evidence was circumstantial and that Betty's death could have been a tragic medical reaction. The legal battle was set in motion. Pre-trial hearings began in late 2023 and stretched into 2024. They centered on the foundations of forensic proof, how search histories were obtained, whether the hospital's internal data complied with privacy rules, and how accurately laboratory results measured colchicine concentration. Defense attorneys argued that investigators exceeded warrant limits when reviewing Bowman's work computer at Mayo Clinic, a computer ostensibly used for professional research into toxicology. Prosecutors countered that once probable cause existed, those searches on topics like lethal dosages and trace detection became unambiguously relevant. In early 2024, Judge Christina Stevens ruled that the majority of digital and toxicology evidence would remain admissible, including the computer searches and purchase records. Only a small subset of personal emails deemed unrelated would be excluded. For prosecutors, that decision was a major victory. As journalists combed public filings, new details emerged. Investigators found that days before Betty's hospitalization, Bowman had searched how to file insurance claims online and had received email instructions from policy administrators. Another file contained notes describing colchicine's lethal dose in milligrams per kilogram of body weight, the exact calculation used in pharmacology textbooks. Together, it formed a mosaic of premeditation, one that prosecutors believe eliminates reasonable doubt. The defense has previewed its counterarguments, challenging the chain of custody for toxicology samples, suggesting potential contamination, and emphasizing that no witnesses actually saw Bowman administer the poison. They claim that as a toxicology specialist, he routinely researched poisons as part of his work, and prosecutors misinterpreted academic curiosity as homicidal intent. While lawyers prepare, Betty's family endures the slow, procedural grind. Her mother and sister appear at hearings, silent but steady, sometimes clutching framed photos of Betty in her white lab coat. Friends from the clinic fill courtroom rows, determined to show that she is not forgotten. Outside the legal arena, her death sparked conversations within the medical community about oversight and access. Hospitals have reviewed internal policies on how researchers request or store controlled toxic substances. Poison control centers have audited digital logs. Colleagues argue that the tragedy shows how easily specialized knowledge can be twisted for harm when supervision lags behind expertise. As spring 2024 unfolds, no trial date has yet been finalized, though court calendars suggest proceedings could begin later in the year. Connor Bowman remains in custody, isolated from the life he once shared with Betty. Inside his cell, letters arrive from his attorneys and few others. The prosecution continues to refine its evidence exhibits, while defense motions challenge everything from witness admissibility to the scope of search warrants. The trial, when it happens, is expected to hinge on science, the precise concentration of colchicine in Betty's blood, the pharmacokinetics proving or disproving oral ingestion, and the plausibility that anyone other than Connor could have introduced such quantities. For now, the law's machinery turns slowly. Each hearing, each motion, each lab report inches the case toward resolution. The media, fascinated but cautious, labels it the Mayo Clinic poisoning, a grim headline that belies the human reality underneath. Those who knew Betty prefer not to define her by her manner of death. They remember her laughter echoing through pharmacy corridors, her patient explanations to interns, her small handwritten notes reminding colleagues to take care of themselves. One coworker said she had the kind of mind that lit up when solving a problem. That mind was extinguished, not by illness, but, if the state's allegations prove true, by betrayal from the very person she trusted most. Because Betty Bowman's story is not only a crime tale, it is a reminder that truth and compassion are the twin pillars of medicine, and that even when betrayal intrudes, the pursuit of truth endures. As of spring 2024, the case stands poised for trial. Prosecutors, defense attorneys, experts, and a waiting public all prepare for answers. When court finally convenes, the evidence will speak, and whatever the outcome, the record will at least bear witness to what happened in those fateful August days. May her story remind us that knowledge alone is not virtue. It is the choices we make with that knowledge that decide who we truly are. If this case moved you, please like the video, and if you want to see more true crime cases like this, don't forget to subscribe our channel. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.